I'm going to tell you one little fun biology thing about Arabica as a species. Of those 133 species, they all share the same number of chromosomes in their cells, which is 22. All 133 of them. 134th, Arabica has 44 chromosomes, twice the number, which is weird and unusual.
Coffee is a magical drink, and it comes from a magical plant. If you drink coffee every day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's nothing quite like starting your morning with that hot, steaming, fragrant cup. You sip on it, it rejuvenates your soul, it prepares you for the day ahead. But the interesting thing is, not every type of coffee has that effect on every person. Depending on the species, the variety, and even the origin of coffee, you might find something that you think is kind of mediocre, or you might find something that speaks directly to your soul. And that depends on the biochemistry inside of the cup. So that's what today's episode is all about, how understanding things like species, anatomy, and origin of coffee helps deepen your coffee experience as a consumer and opens you up to a whole new world of flavor and health compounds. And I have the perfect guest for today's subject, Dr. Shawn Steiman, who holds MS and PhD degrees from the University of Hawaii in both tropical plant and soil sciences. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a researcher, and an educator of the coffee plant for over 20 years. And he's been giving lectures all over the globe on this subject. Welcome to the show, Shawn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I am tickled to be here.
Really, really appreciate you taking the time, because here at the Health First Coffee podcast, we really want to commit to helping our listeners and coffee consumers understand more about the plant itself, because then we can better understand the complexities for both flavor and for health. So I really appreciate you joining us. And of course, Ildi Revi, Chief Learning Officer from Purity Coffee, is with us. Welcome, Ildi.
Thank you. Very excited to talk to Dr. Shawn Steiman. He was one of my teachers, and I learned a lot from him.
Well, I'm really excited about this one. So let's dive right in. Let's start from a 30,000-foot view, Shawn, for the lay people like me, and then we'll work our way down into the complex and the nitty-gritty. So can you begin by giving an overview for the listeners on the basics when we talk about anatomy and coffee? What a coffee bean is, the plant that it comes from, and all the other anatomical features that a coffee tree exhibits, like cherry, silver skin, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. Coffee plant. It's in the botanical family Rubiaceae, which the plant you're most familiar with that's in that family is probably gardenia. And as it turns out, coffee flowers also smell really amazing, just like gardenias do. So coffee is from Ethiopia, Sudan area of Africa. There's lots of different species. There's about 134 or so species. I'm not sure if that's the exact number. That's pretty close. A lot of species of this plant. And every species is a little bit different or a lot different, right? A species is something that generally we say can't interbreed with another species. And with plants, it's not as tight as it is with animals, but the definition of life in species is fluid. So let's roll with that. All right, so the coffee plant, the one that we most think of, people who love the taste of coffee, the one we tend to think of as a coffee plant is Coffea arabica. Arabica is one of these 134 species. The other species that we're really familiar with is Coffea canifera, also known as robusta. Let's talk about varieties real quick, and then we'll talk about plants, plant anatomy and phenology. When we think of a variety of something, we think of something within a species that is similar to other things in the species, but different enough that we want it to have a different name. So you were very familiar with this. Think apples. Every apple you eat is the same species, but they're all different varieties. They all taste different. They all look different. Dog breed is the same way. All dogs are the same species. They all look different. They have different sizes. I'm sure they all taste different. But they're things that are similar enough to each other, but they're in the same species. But we, as users or things that interact with those species, want to differentiate different subcategories of that species. So within both Arabica and Canifera, there's lots of different varieties. And these things vary because of how they look, how they taste, how they grow, how they are biochemically made up, all sorts of ways. The difference can be anything we think is important enough to make it different. It's in some ways arbitrary, even though you could say, oh, this fruit is yellow, this fruit is red. That's not arbitrary, it's different. Is it an important difference? That's sort of the question. So coffee, because it grew up in the tropics, tends to be an evergreen species. And I say tends because if you don't take very good care of it, it drops leaves. But if it's pretty healthy, it will keep its leaves almost all the time. They form in pairs, and they are placed on branches in pairs that run down the branch. And wherever there was once a pair of leaves is the potential to have flowers and fruits. The flowers will come out, and they are these small, white, very fragrant flowers that last, maybe 2 days, 3 days when they're open, and then they shrivel up and fall off. And then where those flowers are, you're going to find fruits eventually. All goes well. Most fruits start out green because they photosynthesize. They capture some energy for themselves. And then when they start to ripen, like all fruits we're familiar with, they start to change colors. And primarily in coffee, that color is red. But as I mentioned earlier, there's yellow varieties, there's pink varieties, orange varieties. You're not really sure, balances of all those things. But the vast majority are red. The next section is yellow. Then the other colors are pretty rare. We don't eat the fruits. We discovered as humans that the best part of the plant for us is the seed. So we have the seed that is surrounded by several layers, including this fleshy, fruity layer, which, by the way, is perfectly edible and perfectly harmless. It's not perfectly delicious, but it's edible and it's fine. I've never known anybody to say, "Wow, we should be breeding coffee for this fruit." But no, we've been inspired, and maybe we just need the inspiration because people are always looking for ways to use the coffee fruit.
Well, they look beautiful. Those cherries, they look delicious. I've always wondered where do all those delicious cherries go? But it sounds like they're just not as appetizing as, say, the cherries we're used to in the grocery store.
Correct. And the fact that in English we use the word cherry is sort of a strike against it because we assume because we use the word cherry, that's delicious. In Spanish, they say uva, which is grape. So that would be the same misnomer, right? Oh, this must be delicious.
But also there's not that much substance to them. That's the thing.
That's true, but there's a lot of them. So when you harvest a lot of coffee, you get a lot of cherries. So volume-wise, but a prunus cherry is the same way, right? It's a little bit of tiny fruit with little seed inside.
But we're most concerned with that seed. That's what we're really after. That's the thing
right.
that contains the caffeine. That's the thing that makes us go and smells so good when you roast
flavor, right? Well, it
Yeah.
does have flavor, but not as a raw seed, right? When you pick that coffee cherry and you get off all those layers, even by hand, the seed is wet and moist and looks nothing like coffee that we would expect. You have to get all those layers off. You have to dry the seed down, and you have to roast it. And there's actually a lot of steps. So the coffee that we drink is very different from the coffee out on the farm. And how you go from the tree to that dried green seed is important. Up until fairly recently, and by recently I see maybe the last 20 to 30 years, we haven't really cared that much because we haven't cared much about quality in general. Right? Farmers just made coffee for rich people to drink, and they had this flavorful thing, and it had caffeine. And yes, specialty coffee has been a thing since the late 70s, but no one was really delving too deep until the turn of the century.
Mm-hmm.
So getting that fruit off the tree and turning it into a dry seed is now really important. It's so important that there's many different ways of doing it that both influence the end taste, the longevity of the seed we've discovered, and of course the biochemistry. And by biochemistry, we can then assume, or we should consider anyways, that biochemistry might have an influence on our systems as humans, not just our systems as our mouths. So does processing make a big difference for health? Who knows? Probably. Something we got to look at.
You might do an entire podcast on it. It's such a big subject. You know what I mean, Shawn?
Yeah.
What you said about the number of species of coffee that exist versus the number of species that we grow. Did I hear that right? There's over 100 different species of coffee, but we really only focus on 2. Is that correct? And why is that?
That is correct. That's a great question. I'm going to tell you one little fun biology thing about Arabica as a species, and then that'll help play into some of that answer, I think. So of those 133 species, they all share the same number of chromosomes in their cells, which is 22. All 133 of them. 134th, Arabica, has 44 chromosomes, twice the number, which is weird and unusual. One of the things that can help group a set of things together as a species is having the same number of chromosomes. But here's one that doesn't. And the reason for this is that in plants, they can do this weird chromosome stacking thing, where instead of the normal plant splitting its chromosomes in half and then blending them sexually with another plant, this weird thing happens somewhere in coffee's history where two different species, instead of their chromosomes splitting and combining to form a normal 22 chromosome plant, they somehow didn't split. They somehow combined and formed a species that had 44 chromosomes.
Wow.
That then survived. Right? Animals would never survive. Or like a mule, right? Mules can't reproduce because they are these weird hybrids that lose their reproductive potential. Plants can do this. You can stack chromosomes. The Coffea arabica is this anomaly in the species, and that has clearly provided an advantage to it from a human perspective, right? Arabica we tend to think of as being tastier. So that's the one we've selected and that we've nurtured for most of human history with coffee. But why is it Arabica and Conifera are the ones that have really held out? The easiest one for Arabica is that, well, it tastes good.
Yeah.
We liked it. We want to stick with it. Conifera does not tend to taste as good, but it's drinkable. And for a lot of human history, it was easier to grow because it was pest resistant and disease resistant somewhat, either a lot or somewhat. And so you could grow it in places where you couldn't as easily grow Arabica. So there are other species of Coffea that taste good, but maybe they're not that great to farm because they don't produce a lot, or it's really hard to get the seed out of the skin, or they live in really finicky climates. There's all kinds of reasons why they might be great tasting, but just not that great agronomically. And
Mm.
ultimately, agronomy and horticulture are things that we do. We study plants to make them useful for us. And if they're not that useful in enough ways, we're going to move on. So we have these two species that are predominantly grown around the world. And by predominantly, I'm going to say effectively 100%, probably 99%, but it's up there. That being said, there's pockets of other species that have been grown consistently all this time. Some have had big favor and have gone out of favor. And we're at a really interesting place right now in coffee in potential species because climate change is real and it's coming and it's affecting us already and it's only going to get worse. And we need to think about what other genes are out there that might be helping us grow coffee that we like or grow coffee that we like enough. The great and wondrous Aaron Davis at Kew Gardens has sort of been at the forefront of finding species and varieties that are once known that might be useful. But there could be all sorts of things we already know and have access to that we just need to breed and manipulate.
The gene stacking is very interesting in how Arabica has more chromosomes than the rest of these. Does that directly translate to its phytochemical production capability? Is there a direct line between, hey, yeah, it tastes better because it's able to produce a wider range of chemicals? Like, what's the through line there that makes it better?
I'm going to say the disappointing part, which is for decades, people have been trying to figure out what are the chemicals that make coffee taste the way it does, right? Because if we could do that, we knew that, boy, could we really start crafting and manipulating in ways that would really cater to our tastes. In fact, my master's degree project was designed just for that, to look at can we find some biochemicals that translate into taste. And since we know Arabica tastes great, right? So you might do things like let's compare Arabica and Conifer and see if they are chemically different, which they are. How are they different? Okay, which of those things should we look at that might be playing a role in taste? And then you could now with our more modern technologies of looking at genes and proteins and whatnot, you could look at a larger swath of things to sort of do this. And I certainly hope people are. I don't know. Um, so does the double set of chromosomes in Arabica explain the flavor difference? Absolutely. How? No idea. It's a huge mystery, and part of it is because it's just a really hard problem. Let's say you pick a farm, a large farm that has perfectly homogeneous field, right? All the soil is identical everywhere in the field, which is never the case. The weather is always the same. So throughout the course of the year, every plant exhibits the exact same climate. And the water that the plants get is exactly the same. And the nutrition that the plants get are exactly the same. Let's say we could control all that, right? Then you have to make sure everything else is pretty identical. The time that you pick it and how it's processed and how it's dried and how it's roasted. And there's lots of these little steps. Now, if you could control them all pretty well, right? We know there's variation in everything we do, right? The scientists, we define our existence by variation. And our goal is to minimize variation, right? So if we could control all these things and minimize variation across the whole set of things, could we then, try to look at the chemical differences that are arising just from one thing, right? Just the genetics, potentially. But then here's where it gets really frustrating. We already got a hard part. Now you have to decide, well, where am I going to look at those chemicals and how am I going to connect them to taste, right? Do you want to look at it before it's roasted? Because we know roasting is a black box of chaos. So we could look at it green and say, well, we know these chemicals are different, right? Arabica and conifer are way different in their green chemistries in some significant ways. Then you roast it, and then they get different in all kinds of more ways. All right, so now we have these, let's say, roasted products that have thus far been all identical in every possible imaginable way, because we're still just, a pipe dream research here. Then you have to engage the very worst instrument known to man, which is man, right? We are terrible instruments. And it makes us wonderful human, but terrible instruments, right? So now you have to say, all right, bad instruments, you need to taste all these things. Tell us in as precise a way as possible, in infinite ways, how they're different. But then you have to do the chemistry work and say, okay, these chemicals vary this way, and these tastes vary this way, and look, hopefully they match up somewhere. But what if it's not even a 1-to-1, right? What if it's these 3 things make these 5 things, but influence this thing? It's a magnificent, complicated problem. And as a 22-year-old moving to Hawaii to study coffee and work on this project, I didn't know anything, right? I was like, this is such a cool project. I'm going to change the world, right? Master's students who don't know anything. It was amazing, and it certainly shaped how I think about complexity. So it's just a really tough problem, and we have mathematics and tools are incredibly strong, and we could probably, we're farther along than we were 25 years ago. I don't think we're really far though. I've never seen anything that is convincing me that these sets of chemicals produce this. There is some old research of trying to identify coffee smell. Like, what is quintessential coffee smell? And there's some older research. I want to say it's from the 70s or 80s, which has narrowed down like 28 chemicals that you mix them all together. Oh yeah, this is what coffee smells like. But that's a far cry from the infinite combinations of the over 1,000 volatiles in coffee aroma, roasted brewed coffee aroma that then, might translate to taste. Never mind taste across the entire human population, which is in itself different physiologically. Never mind all the other things that make us bad instruments.
This is so important as we're talking about taste, but this is exactly what I have in 10 years of working with Purity, looking at the science and all the research that they do. And they're at this point, I would say if you went into Google Scholar, over 100,000 papers that have to do with coffee, science, and health. And it's the thing that I'm starting to realize is even with those 100,000 papers, the human complexity, the plant complexity, the transformation of the plant throughout the whole thing is so complex that when we're talking about the health benefits of coffee, it's a struggle because we can never tell anybody for certain what a coffee is going to do for them. This is why we have to be very careful from my perspective how we talk about coffee and health. How can we trust the science at the same time as understanding its limitations?
Yeah, and taking a magic bullet approach to what is essentially one of the most complex subjects that incorporates human biology, soil biology, all of these things all together.
I'm going to take the standard, what I think of as a standard scientific caveat, which is we amass information to the best of our abilities, best tools we have to come up with answers that we think are most likely true. Sometimes all that happens in the best of ways, and 20 years later, we learn something different that changes our mind about that, right? Scientific method is meant to evolve. It's meant to show new understandings or mistakes. We get new information, and we have to be willing to accept that. Once you take this perspective, it's a lot easier, at least for me, to say, oh, okay, let's look at the whole mass of things and see if we can accept that there might be trends, right? We can make it simpler and just do caffeine. Like we know caffeine, we respond to caffeine. That's a real thing for many people. Science is looking at something, it's doing something. We looking at caffeine, I can feel it myself, right? I have personal knowledge. There's this documented knowledge. Enough of us agree. Now, if we can see that and we can agree to that, is it that hard to say to somebody, look, here's these other chemicals that you don't respond to quite that way. Maybe you respond to much more slowly or much more nuanced way. And there's data that shows that they vary across coffee. And there's data that shows that in research studies with humans that, it seems to be that when people have more of this thing or less of this thing, the population at large changes. And this is another really important idea, the population at large, right? You and I might both drink a cup of poison, and we might respond differently to the cup of poison because we're different people. You put 100,000 people in a room and drink that poison, most of them are probably going to respond in not such a great way. Some of them will somehow not be so hurt. Scientists look at populations. They look at samples of populations to try to represent the population at large. So now we have 100,000 papers easily. These are the ones that are in Google Scholar, not even all the ones because Google Scholar doesn't see everything. And there are things that repeatedly seem to show up that extend our life or reduce liver cancer or make us have better memories or whatever it is. On the whole, as a population, that's what we see. It's hard not to believe it to be true, even if how the data was collected takes some consideration. But when enough different cultures and enough different researchers and enough different people look at chemicals and say, oh, there is definitely something happening here, we might not understand exactly what it is or the exact amounts of it or how it interacts with individuals or even with populations. It seems like it's happening. So coffee and health, there are books covering this now. It's not like last week someone said, chlorogenic acids in coffee. I bet those are important. No. There are loads of studies that show coffee in general, therefore things in coffee, are influencing humans in a way that is largely positive. It can be largely negative too, right? I've met people allergic to caffeine or people who their stomachs get so upset with coffee that they can't drink it. And there's a few other nuances of negative responders. But as a whole, as a population of humans, coffee seems to be good for us. There's always going to be some exception, right? That's the nature of populations and bell curves. It's totally fine. But I'm pretty convinced that coffee does, at the very least, nothing bad for us. Even more least, it does some good for us. Aside from caffeine, right? We can always talk about caffeine as this weird thing, but that's an exceptional part of the conversation. The other things, I think things are happening. Do I want to be a superhuman because I drink coffee? Absolutely. Am I jumping over buildings? I'm not, but maybe I'm going to live 6 months longer than I otherwise would have. I'll never know, right? I'll never be able to pin that down.
Not jumping over buildings yet.
Yeah.
Seen a few more cups.
It's the right coffee, right?
It's the right
Or a really low building.
I heard some good things about that Hawaiian coffee. We'll cover that in another episode. But that was really well said, Shawn. Really beautifully put there.
Let's say there's a start and an end to this idea of coffee and health, right? That there's a point where we knew nothing about it. And there's a point where we know everything there is to know. And there's a continuum, right? You are on this part of the continuum that's pretty young, right? You're on the don't know very much end. There's a lot to know. So we're sort of tinkering now. We're exploring. We're going to make some mistakes. But we seem to be going in a direction that seems true. We're just a lot earlier on that continuum than we want to be. And that sucks, right? But if people don't work on it, right? People didn't work on electricity, we wouldn't have computers. Right? If people didn't work on gas motors, we wouldn't have jet planes. Like there's a point where you were just at the beginning of it. And we're in the beginning. But if we don't work on it, we're never going to get towards the end.
So, Shawn, I'd love to bring it back to origin and species and anatomy and how that ties into this biochemistry, because it is very fascinating, the work that you're doing. And what interests me when you talk about cultivars and varieties of coffee, types of coffee, consumers and the market at large puts origin first a lot. You'll be like, hey, what type of coffee are you drinking? This is a Colombian. They answer with the origin first a lot of the time. And so I'd love to get your opinion on how the origin plays into this and how that can affect the biochemistry of the coffee.
Happy to do that. But I also what I really want to say is, why is that the case? Why do consumers do that?
No, please, exactly. I'd love to know.
Let's go back 60 years and think about how, particularly in this country, we got coffee, right? You probably went to a grocery store. You probably did not go to many small local roasters. Coffee that you would have been labeled purely by the country it came from. This is Brazil, this is Colombia, this is Java. That's just how coffee commerce worked. And because of both how coffee was processed and manipulated within that country, and also the many differences between different countries, the coffees tasted differently. And so people would get these coffees, they would recognize some difference. That seemed to be true across that origin. And they started associating coffee flavor with a coffee origin, whether or not that was an accurate correlation to make. Ernest Dunstan, who coined the term specialty coffee, said, right, coffees from different countries taste differently, and that's important. We should be thinking about that, right? And then specialty coffee exploded, and that's can be true. Coffees from different places can taste differently, but coffees from different places actually can also taste the same. And that really makes you ask the question, so what's the importance of place? And being from a small producing region like Hawaii, where origin reputation is really important, the idea of origin having a taste is really important. And notice I keep using the word origin. And origin is a arbitrary distinction humans make, right? This is from this place that has political boundaries that define, a country. Plants don't know or see that, right? They grow in environments, right? They experience temperature and air pressure and nutrient content and water resources and competition. They're just living in a place. And how they respond to that place and those pressures and that reality influences what they become, both in terms of a plant, in terms of their fruits, in terms of their seeds. So if this is the case, right, if there are similar environments throughout the planet and you take the same genetic makeup of a plant, I think it's pretty easy to conclude that you might find similar tastes from the same genes grown all over the planet. Origin means nothing to me in terms of what a plant might taste like or what the quality is. Out of human context. In human context, right, where all of the coffee in Colombia, right, different Colombian regions were all, homogenized together to get shipped in containers out to somewhere that's then roasted in a big, right? There's a lot of homogenization, which creates flavor profiles of a place. And if you have a homogenization effect of a particular origin, yeah, the origin tastes like something. But specialty coffee has destroyed all that. And you can have two farms anywhere next to each other that grow the same variety in very similar environments, but then the farmers choose to harvest and process their coffee differently, and it gets roasted differently, and it gets brewed differently. There's all these differences that happen that have nothing to do with the origin or the environment. But if you want to use the terrible term terroir, because of how it's been manipulated, that's why it's terrible, right? If everything that happens on the farm, right? Yeah, these two farmers who have similar environments who then choose different processes to create different flavors with the same variety, what does that place taste like then? Now you have very different flavors from the same environment. So I think that's all silly. I think what we have is things that help shape coffee quality that humans can manipulate and some things that they cannot manipulate. And it goes all the way to the end user. As much as I love the romance of this place tasting like this, or this place being better than this, we have another falsehood that results from our marketplace. So if you come to Kona and you want to pick one of the 800 odd farms that grow coffee, just randomly pick, you're going to get a random picked quality coffee. And that's true of El Salvador, and that's true of Rwanda. But certain companies have worked really hard to do the selecting for us, and they bias our interpretation of origin because we haven't had lots of things from that origin. We've just had those three amazing things that many people have wheedled down to get into the roaster that you shop from. Origin is a political idea. That's the summation.
That is really interesting, fascinating stuff, Shawn. And I would love to talk to you more about terroir, maybe in a future episode, and how you think that it has been manipulated, because that stuff is very interesting to me. But what you're saying makes sense, focusing less on the invisible political borders that we make as man and thinking about it from a plant perspective and a biochemical perspective. Beyond just species of coffee. I want to bring it back to this idea of varieties, because again, this stuff is very mysterious to me. What varieties are we growing? If there's just two species out of 130 something, what varieties are we growing? And how do those taste different or act different from one another?
Mm. There's a lot of variety. I'm going to, selfishly, I'm going to focus on Arabica. Arabica is a little easier because the seeds of a coffee plant tend to be very similar to the parent that it came from. Imagine you're a farmer who has 10,000 trees in their field or 100,000 trees, and you go out one day and you see this plant that is taller or shorter or has different shaped leaves, or there's something different about it that you notice. You think, huh, that's interesting. Maybe I should taste it to see if it tastes different. So then you taste it, and maybe it tastes different. You're like, oh, I like that. I'm gonna pull that one out and pull some of those seeds out and start a new field with it. So over time, two things have happened. People have picked out different varieties in their fields and thought this looks valuable and important. Technically, that's a cultivar, right? We are cultivating the variety that we discovered. If you go to Ethiopia, where there's wild coffee and all sorts of forests, because that's where it evolved, there's lots of variation happening. And you can pick one and say, hey, this one is different from this one over there. We have two varieties. Like varieties for this natural pick, right? And they could be different for whoever, right? Famous variety. Someone went to this town in Ethiopia near a town called Gesha, and they picked up some coffee seeds and took them to a research station. And then some farmer went to the research station and picked some of those and planted them on their farm. And then all of a sudden, in the 2000s, have the most famous coffee variety in the world, which is Gesha, all because some scientist picked up some seeds from a plant in Ethiopia. There's nothing magical about it. It just happened to really align with specialty coffee's desires. Varieties and cultivars, same idea, right? Selected individuals of a species, different for all kinds of reasons, which means they almost always taste different, or they agronomically are different, and therefore they're going to be biochemically different. And we know they're biochemically different if they taste different, because inherently, right, all the taste that we have is rooted in biochemistry. So if the taste is different, then there's other differences. Is this an important thing for coffee and health? Absolutely. Do we know anything about it? I don't think so. But it's certainly worth looking at, right? If there's 5 chemicals that we think are really important in coffee that influence human health, either their presence or absence, right? And we can identify those, or we're confident what they are, then we can go looking at varieties to see how those chemicals vary in those varieties, right? It might be that variety A is really good to help you with your heart because it has a lot of something. Variety B does not have so much of that, but maybe it has something that influences cancer. This is beyond where we are with the science right now, but this is where it's going, right? Once we understand the nature of the chemistry and how it influences the population, we can start, drink more of this coffee. It might do this thing for you over the course of 20 years, right? And maybe that's what it is, right? Maybe it's drink this for 20 years. It's not going to be drink this one this week and switch next week. It's not. I don't think we'll ever reach that.
Yeah.
But that's something else we have to consider, right? Could we really fine tune it towards a specific condition that we want to target? And what's the time frame of what's important for that, right? I got antibiotics yesterday for some dental work, right? 10 days, I'm going to take the antibiotics, done. Super easy. I just don't think coffee's going to work that way.
Coffee doesn't
heart
work
problem?
like that.
Sleep problems? Yes, we can address that with coffee, right? Stop drinking it, no problem.
Fair enough. Yeah, that is true. And that is really what we're drilling down on this podcast. Ildi, I know you've done a lot of research in different, mineral levels and different chlorogenic acid levels into different varieties. Have you gleaned anything as to how varieties levels change in the lab, or are they all pretty close to each other when we're talking about Arabica?
Well, I would say caffeine is probably the one that varies the most.
Ooh.
Chlorogenic acid also varies, but in terms of like the minerals, they're pretty similar.
Oh, fascinating.
But you can't. I don't know if you can base it on the variety, or rather on the soil, the farming techniques, the way plant maintenance.
We have to go back and do that experiment where the varieties are all grown in the very similar conditions. So the thing that are varying about it is the genetics and not the environmental factors or farmer factors. Right? We have to control all that. You have to be really careful about all the other details. Even just, what if it's roasted differently, right?
So, Shawn, we now have covered the anatomy, we've covered species, we've covered variety, we've covered origin. Let's talk about the farming part just a little bit. And in your eyes, what quality means when we add all of this up together. The farm stage is so important because it can look so different from commercial monocropping that you just take one look at it and you go, well, that's very different than this permaculture, regenerative, biodynamic style of farming. So when it comes to all of these things added up, what is quality in your mind? How should we be thinking about these sorts of things as consumers?
We have we have to define quality if we're going to talk about it, right? And we can even and there's a broad idea, right? When you say quality of something about coffee, they're thinking, what does it taste like? What's the taste quality like, right? So therefore, I could answer your question in terms of, okay, how is the farming practice influencing what I'm tasting in my cup? But maybe that's too simplistic. Or maybe inherent in the definition of how it tastes should also be, has it done good things for the planet throughout its whole process? And that's a perfectly good definition, but those become different answers really
Hmm.
quick, right? Um, my take on quality is that we have to define it every time we use it, right? So the nature of the conversation is going to shift what we're talking about. So many times, right, as a one of my companies is a company that sells coffee beans that I buy from other roasters, not I don't roast, and that I resell those coffee. And my consumers think about coffee and how it tastes, right? This is good coffee or it's not because it resonates with my taste buds. And it's pretty simple. That's how most people approach it. For the last 30, 40 years, uh, you know, researchers and tree huggers, some have been trying to promote this idea that, well, we should, we should measure quality also on how the coffee farm exists and what it does to the people on the farm and the plants on the farm and the environment, either on point or non-point, right? So obviously, you add fertilizer here, it washes away and causes trouble somewhere else, right? These are valuable measures of quality, which unfortunately economically are never captured really, which is why we don't tend to see them in the end result, right? People don't. The end consumer doesn't think about it because a farmer can add fertilizer that goes washes away and they're not responsible for that. So that cost isn't part of the cup. In terms of what we think of as more sustainable farming practices, regenerative agriculture, whatever that means, and permaculture and organic farming, right? All these things that try to reduce a negative impact on a farm or on the land, right? Some of those things have an economic tie-in, right? You can be organic certified and might be able to recoup some of that. There's all sorts of these certifications, right, which are designed to add an economic and a trust component into the end price of that cup so that it should taste good. And inherently, because you like the way it tastes, you also happen to be doing those other things. You're just paying a little bit more for all those other things, right? Where the expectation is it should also taste good. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was a more standard emotional attachment to how farms exist?
Yeah.
I did my graduate work in a lab that was open minded, but definitely pro green revolution, right? Better living through chemistry. We can add things to our farm to make farming easier. Not that we should destroy the farm, right? That wasn't, I was always a very save the planet, being very liberal tree hugger kind of kid. Um, and leaving that lab and that graduate experience, I learned that there's a middle space, right? What I say to my clients is, hey, there's lots of ways to farm. You get to pick, and I can help you pick, and I can help you do whatever it is you want to do. I don't always love that option because I wish they would do other things. But ultimately, right, farmers get to choose what they choose.
Hmm.
I think quality is a balance of how the end product turns out. It's a product of sustainability of production, right? You have to make a living to do what you're doing with the means you have available to you. And you shouldn't destroy the thing that you're working with, the land you're working on to do it. And that means there's a lot of different ways of doing things. Some people say there's one right way or one category of ways, and I'm just not sure that's true. Um, and I know this is tangent, but I'm also pretty convinced that agrochemicals aren't inherently bad. That synthetic agrochemicals can do good, and they have to be used judiciously and wisely, and as maybe as little as possible in some cases. But mixed with a system where you are trying to regenerate or trying to use permaculture, right? Maybe the joint system is the right system, right? The chemicals aren't always inherently bad. So that being said, what's the quality of a product? Ultimately, right, the person who's choosing it is deciding what that means to them, even though they have no idea, like they couldn't put into words, right? Some people will buy something that's organically certified because it's got that stamp on it, right? And that's a measure of quality. Of course, they have like the taste of it, so they'll buy it again, that sort of thing. If I were, a coffee god and got to help do this, right? If I got to define what it is. Oh, it's so not my style. Um,
That's the type of person we want in that position, by the way.
right, person doesn't want to be there.
Exactly.
At this point in human history, I think it's pretty clear that we've done more harm to the environment than good on a large scale, and it's time that we manipulate the marketplace to make that correction, because the marketplace is not designed to make that correction. I think quality should have a more comprehensive definition. Some of the research about climate change and coffee is, like by 2050, things are going to be just disastrous. I don't think that's totally true, because I think there's ways we'll be able to manipulate it. I think we'll have some amelioration. So in my lifetime, I don't think this is, I'm always going to have coffee and coffee that I want to drink. But in my daughter's lifetime, in her daughter's lifetime, we make choices now that reverberate. Maybe we should make choices now that reverberate in different ways, even if it means going against the definition of the system that we're in.
Shawn, I want to thank you for coming on the show, because this has just been an eye-opening, absolutely enlightening exploration here on the Health First Coffee podcast. You really know what's going on in the world of coffee, and you really brought some amazing knowledge to us today. So I really appreciate you, Shawn. Where can people find more about you and your work? Any books you want to promote? Our audience would love to know where to find you.
Thank you. Those are kind words. I have written some books. One of them is out of print. The Hawaii Coffee book, for those of you who want a book about all things coffee from seed to cup, that covers everything, but in a sort of a introductory way. That uses sort of Hawaii's case study. A Little Coffee Know-It-All, which is the one out of print, which is sort of a coffee FAQ where I take a question about coffee and answer it using the available scientific literature at the time, which was 2015. And then the third book, which is Coffee, Comprehensive Guide to the Bean, the Beverage, and the Industry, is sort of a coffee textbook. I'm a co-editor and had some chapters in it. Many different coffee luminaries added chapters to this book, and it covers all sorts of things from origins to science to culture. So those are books that I've written or been associated with. I have websites. I consult. If people just want to talk coffee, I have a small Hawaii-based company called Grok Coffee, which doesn't really do any good unless you, in fact, live in Hawaii. In fact, live on my island. It's very tree hugger. It's very socially forward. It's very how do we do a different model of coffee that is good for the planet and good for your soul? Hopefully. I'm around. I'm easy to find. Type my name into a search bar and you'll find me.
Awesome, man. Doing the good work out there with coffee education. We appreciate you, Shawn. Really, truly. That's all for today, listeners. Thank you so much. I know you enjoyed this in-depth exploration. We got more coming at you on the Health First Coffee podcast. So make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you stay tuned for more Shawn, more future episodes. And that's all for today. This is Ildi Revi, Shawn Steiman, and Jordan River, all signing off. Wishing you an extraordinary day. We will see you next time on the Health First Coffee podcast. Bye, everybody.